Welcome to Sleepy Night. If you're lying quietly under your blanket right now, the light's already turned off and only a soft glow from your night lamp remains. Then, this is the moment to let yourself drift into a peaceful night. Let every sound outside slowly fade away. The distant waves, the breeze slipping through the window frame, the gentle tick-tock of the clock in the small room, they are all here together, guiding you softly into sleep. Tonight, I'll tell you a story about Helen, an elderly woman who was given the chance to return to when she was 18, to start her life over, to say the words left unspoken, and to love again the things she once forgot. So now, take a deep breath in and slowly let it out. Everything is calm. Let your eyes gently close, and together, let's begin her story. In a small seaside town, where white-roofed houses nestled quietly among the dunes, stood an old wooden cottage with windows facing the open sea. People rarely paid attention to it. Only sometimes, when passing by in the early morning, they would notice a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney, and the scent of coffee drifting gently through the breeze. That house belonged to Mrs. Helen Moore, 72 years old. She had spent nearly her entire life there. In her parents' old home, the place where she had grown up, had fallen in love, and had said goodbye to almost everyone she had ever loved. That morning, the sea was quiet. The surface was so still, it mirrored the drifting clouds above. Helen sat by the window, her thin hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The scent of coffee mingled with the salty air, bringing her a gentle comfort, even though the sunlight outside was softer, paler than it used to be. On the table, amid a pile of old letters, lay a photograph. In it, an 18-year-old girl was smiling, her golden hair lifted by the wind. Helen gazed at the picture for a long while, then exhaled softly, as if afraid to disturb a fragile dream. "It's been more than 50 years," she whispered. The old clock on the wall kept ticking steadily. Each second felt like a heartbeat, slow but certain. Helen had grown used to that sound for half her life. On the table lay another letter, one that had never been sent. The name on it read Thomas Avery. She had once been a beautiful young woman, the kind of beauty that was gentle, timeless, and distant, like the light of the moon. She once owned a small shop, once loved deeply, and once left everything behind to move to the city, chasing what people like to call a dream. But that dream had turned into years of solitude. And when she finally came back, Thomas was gone. Helen sat gazing out at the sea, where the waves kept rising and falling, as if they had never once paused in their endless dance. On the window ledge, a small sparrow was tapping its beak against the glass. She smiled softly. "So, you're here again?" Her voice was low and warm, as though she was speaking to an old friend. Every morning, that little bird would visit, as if it carried a message from someone far away. That morning, thin layer of grey clouds covered the sky. Helen carefully set her cup of coffee down on the table and opened an old wooden box from the bookshelf. Inside were the small keepsakes of a lifetime: a faded ribbon, a train ticket, a silver ring, and a letter that had never been opened. Outside, the rain began to fall. Not heavy, just gentle drops tapping steadily on the roof, enough to blur the room through the glass. Helen pulled the wool blanket closer, cast one last look toward the sea, and slowly closed her eyes. In that moment, time seemed to stop. The sound of rain turned into a lullaby. The waves blended with her breath, and the ticking clock tick-tock, tick-tock seemed to slow with every beat. Helen felt warmth returning to her hand. A soft glow spread around her, as if someone had quietly opened a door and let the sunlight pour in. In a dream somewhere between waking and sleep, she found herself walking along the shore. The wind lifted her dress, and her hair flowed long and soft, just as it had when she was young. Ahead of her, the sea shimmered, sparkling like 1,000 tiny mirrors. A voice echoed, distant, deep and gentle. "Would you like to start over, Helen?" She turned around. No one was there, only the wind and the sound of the waves. Then the voice came again, closer this time, as if it were speaking from within her own heart. "If you could, would you choose differently?" Helen didn't answer. She only closed her eyes. When she opened her eyes, everything had changed. The light was so bright that she had to raise her hand to shield her face. No more rain. No ticking clock. Only the sound of birds singing and the scent of sunlight. Helen looked down at her hands. The wrinkles were gone. Her skin was soft, smooth, and radiant. On the table, the cup of coffee had vanished. In its place lay a small bouquet of white daisies and a calendar page that read the 12th of April 1968. Helen sprang to her feet and looked around. The room was filled with light. On the walls hung the paintings she had made in her youth. There was the old wooden desk, the oil lamp, the open notebook, and a small mirror beside the wide open window. In the mirror, she saw the reflection of an 18-year-old girl, her eyes bright and full of life. Helen reached out and touched the glass. It was cool beneath her fingers, yet her hand trembled with emotion. What's happening?" the young girl whispered. But her voice carried the tone of someone who had already lived a lifetime. On the table, the open notebook lay waiting, the handwriting neat and rounded. Helen Moore, to-do list for summer 1968. She brushed her fingers gently across the page. Each line felt like a pose from her own life. Write a letter to Thomas. Buy new sketch paper. Watch the July fireworks. She froze. That name, Thomas. Her heart pounded, as if a memory long buried had suddenly awakened. Thomas, her first love, the boy with the crooked smile, and the habit of tucking a small flower into his shirt pocket. They had once promised to leave this little seaside town together to go to New York and start a new life. But then came the war, the distance, and the letters that never found their way home. All her life, she had wondered, if she hadn't stayed silent that year, would everything have been different? As Helen passed by the small kitchen, she saw her mother washing dishes, her hands cracked and dry, and her father sitting on the porch mending a torn fishing net. For the first time in her life, Helen stopped. She didn't say a word. She simply walked over, knelt down, and placed her hands over her mother's thin, warm fingers. Her mother paused, surprised for a moment, then smiled softly. "What's gotten into you, Helen?" she whispered. "I just want to help, Mom." That afternoon was the first time she ever cooked with her mother. They made fish stew with potatoes. The scent of onions and black pepper filled the kitchen air. Her father sat on the porch, humming an old tune as he worked on the net. Helen stood beside him, wiping his hands gently with a towel, something she had never done in all her youth. When the stew was ready, the three of them sat together. 3 chairs, 1 small table, a soft golden light above them. Her parents laughed and talked about ordinary things, and Helen felt a strange, tender warmth bloom quietly inside her heart. Was she dreaming? Or was this some kind of miracle, an answer to the quiet wish she'd carried all her life? Be the wish to begin again? Helen, 18, once more stepped out onto the porch, sunlight spilling across her face. The wind carried the scent of salt, and in the distance the church bells rang, as if announcing a brand new beginning. She looked up at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly, the sunlight threading through her hair, touching her youthful skin. A single tear slid down her cheek, not from fear, but from something deep and tender. Helen smiled, a smile of wonder and gratitude. That afternoon, she walked to the small cafe at the end of the street, the same place she had once worked as a girl. The wooden door still chimed cling, cling when opened, and the warm scent of fresh waffles filled the air. Behind the counter stood the old owner, Marianne, still young now, polishing a glass. "Good morning, Helen, early as always." The familiar voice made her pause. It was as if a film reel had suddenly started running backward. Helen smiled softly. "I just wanted to smell the morning coffee again." "Your coffee's ready, extra milk, little sugar, just the way you like." Marianne set the cup before her. That scent. It was the smell of youth, days of mornings waiting for Thomas to arrive, of the days when the future was still a mystery. When Helen turned toward the door, a familiar figure stepped across the threshold. Thomas, the white shirt, the slightly tousled hair, the bright, gentle eyes. He smiled. Helen, the whole world seemed to stop. She wanted to cry, to run to him, to tell him she had waited for him for more than 50 years. But instead, Helen simply smiled, softly, calmly, as if it were just another ordinary morning in 1968. "Hello, Thomas." He sat down beside her, his smile as warm as ever. I brought you something tickets to the fireworks. This July. Let's go together, okay? Helen looked at the tickets and tears welled in her eyes. Yes, she remembered. That year, he had asked, and she had said no, because she was angry, because she was afraid to love, because she was proud, the way young hearts often are. And after that day, they never saw each other again. But now, she had been given this moment, a chance to choose differently, to love again. Yes, Helen whispered. I'd love to go. Thomas laughed softly. I knew you'd say that. He tilted his head and gently tucked a white flower into her hair. Night fell, and Helen lay in her small room. Moonlight streamed through the window, spilling silver over the thin blanket. She smiled softly, her hand resting on her chest, feeling her heart beating fast, like that of a young girl once more. Was this a dream, or was it a gift? A quiet offering from time itself. To those who have lived long enough to understand regret, in the gentle light of the moon, Helen whispered to herself, if this is a dream, please, don't wake me yet. In the days that followed, the little seaside town of Little Haven seemed brighter in Helen's eyes. Every morning, she walked along the road that led to the beach, the same path she had once taken in the fading corners of her memory. Now everything seemed washed clean by sunlight. The sky was so blue, it made one believe that nothing in the world was impossible. Thomas would always be waiting beneath the old oak tree in front of the bakery, holding 2 cups of hot coffee. His smile tilted just so, like sunlight breaking over waves. Helen took the cup from his hand, feeling the warmth spread through her palms. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that belongs to someone who already knows how fleeting a moment can be, yet still chooses to live it fully. Thomas, she asked softly, have you ever thought, if we could start over, would you choose differently? The question slipped out like a breath, light and quiet, yet it made the air between them still. Thomas frowned for a second, then smiled. I don't know, he said. Maybe I'd still choose you. Helen fell silent, her gaze drifting toward the horizon, where the sea met the clouds. She remembered in her real life, Thomas had left without saying goodbye. A letter from the battlefield arrived much later, stained with mud and rain. He had never come home. Now, sitting before her, he was still alive, still smiling, still with that same gentle look in his eyes. Helen wanted to hold on to it all, to trap time inside this single fleeting moment. But miracles like fragile glass are not meant to be touched too deeply. Each night, she could hear the sea calling, as if someone were whispering that time cannot be rewritten, that all of this was just a beautiful loop, a chance for her to say goodbye in a different way. One afternoon, they sat together by the sea. The sky was heavy with clouds, the wind carried the taste of salt, and seagulls drifted lazily in the distance. Thomas pulled out 2 tickets for the fireworks show that he had been keeping in his pocket. "I heard they're lighting them from the pier this year," he said, eyes bright with a boyish spark. "We'll sit right here and watch the sky." Helen smiled, though an unspoken worry stirred quietly inside her. She hesitated. "Thomas, if you knew that tomorrow we wouldn't see each other again, would you want to know?" Thomas looked at her for a long moment, then gently shook his head. "No, I'd rather let today stay as it is. If I knew everything would end, I'm afraid I wouldn't have the courage to live it." Helen turned away, her eyes glistening. She understood that some people walk through our lives only to teach us one thing, that love isn't always meant to be kept. Sometimes it's meant to be remembered. That night, when Helen returned home, she stood before the mirror. Reflected there was not just the 18-year-old girl, but two versions of herself, one young, one old, gazing at each other in silence. "What is it you wish to change?" The voice echoed inside her mind, deep and distant, like something rising from the bottom of the sea. Helen closed her eyes and took a slow breath. Not to change, but to understand. To understand why I once feared love, feared loss, feared life itself. In the mirror, her reflection began to fade until only the moonlight remained, spilling softly across her face, half smiling, half weeping. The fireworks festival arrived. The town shimmered with flags and color, music drifting from bars along the street. Thomas took Helen's hand and led her to the pier. Fireworks bloomed above them, red, violet, and blue, melting into one another like dreams on the night sky. Helen tilted her head back, her eyes glimmering, as if the ocean itself were reflecting the heavens. Thomas turned to her, voice soft amid the roar. "Are you happy?" Helen nodded. "Yes, I just wish time could stop right here." He smiled, resting his forehead against hers. "Time can't stop, Helen, but we can remember." The sky burst open light, raining down like falling stars. For a moment, Helen felt her hair lift with the wind, the world spinning light, sound, and the pounding of her heart blending into one. A tear slipped down, landing on the ticket in her hand. She held it tightly, smiling through the ache. "I understand now, Thomas. I wasn't brought back to change the ending, but to remember that once I was truly happy." Helen stood there, watching the dark sea beneath the glowing sky. The fireworks still shimmered overhead. She closed her eyes and breathed in deeply. The scent of salt, of the ocean, of time itself. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me live once more, just long enough to say goodbye with a smile." In the days after the fireworks, time began to feel different. Everything around Helen seemed wrapped in a thin veil of mist. When she walked down the old streets, the colors faded, voices grew distant. Even the scent of morning coffee lingered only faintly in the breeze. Helen knew the miracle was coming to an end. Like the tide retreating from the shore quietly, without warning, she still went to the little cafe where she worked. Marianne didn't notice anything unusual. She smiled as always and made Helen her usual cup, coffee with milk, just a touch of sugar. But today, Helen didn't drink it. She just sat there in silence, gazing through the window, where outside Thomas was standing, a bouquet of white flowers in his hand. The sight of him made her heart tighten. She had once thought she would turn away, that she couldn't bear to relive this moment of farewell. But this time, Helen stood up and pushed the door open. The small bell above the cafe door chimed softly. Thomas turned, smiling, his eyes shining just as they had the first day they met. "I came to say goodbye," he said, his voice low and gentle enough to break her heart. Helen whispered, "Where are you going?" Thomas only smiled. "To a far away place, where there are no radios, no letters, but the people I love will always stay in my heart." Helen knew then this was the moment he would leave, as fate had always written it. She stepped closer, her hand trembling as it touched his. "I wish I could keep you here," she said softly. Thomas shook his head with a tender smile. "Don't keep me. Remember me." He reached into his pocket and took out an old postcard, its edges worn and yellowed with time. On it were only a few simple lines. "If one day you find this postcard, it means I'm still somewhere, in the sea, in the wind, in your smile." Helen couldn't hold back her tears. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling his warmth so real, yet fragile as a dream. He leaned close, his voice a whisper against her ear. "Don't be sad, Helen. Life isn't only about goodbyes. It's also about the moments we find each other again, even if only in a dream." That afternoon, Helen returned to her little room. The light was fading, wrapping everything in a soft golden glow, as if a quiet fire was burning gently inside her heart. She sat down at the desk and opened her old notebook. On the blank page, she began to write slowly, each word trembling to the rhythm of her heartbeat. To Helen, the one from the future, if you are reading this, it means we've walked through a long life, carrying regrets that had no name. But you know, regret isn't a burden. It's proof that we once loved deeply, that we truly lived. If I could return, I wouldn't change a thing. I would only hold those beautiful moments once more, with gratitude. Helen set the pen down and exhaled softly. She smoothed the page with her hand, folded it carefully, and slipped it into the small wooden box she would keep for the rest of her life. On the lid, she carved the words. Night fell. Outside, the sound of the waves rose and fell, gentle and steady, a lullaby from the sea. Helen lay in bed, eyes tracing the ceiling, where the moonlight filtered softly through the white curtains. The world around her began to fade. The corner of the table, the chair, the wall, all dissolving into a soft, silvery haze. Then she heard a voice, as light as the ocean breeze. "It's time to go back, Helen," she whispered in return, Thank you for giving me one more summer to live. And with that, she closed her eyes. Everything melted away as gently as a grain of salt falling into water. When Helen opened her eyes again, the first light of morning streamed through the thin curtain, a faint golden ray, warm as a hand brushing her cheek. The wooden ceiling was still there, its tiny cracks unchanged. The clock on the wall kept ticking, tick-tock, tick-tock, steady and calm. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, not from the old kitchen of 1968, but from the little thermos she used every morning. Helen had returned, not as the 18-year-old girl she once was, but as herself 72, with fine lines at the corners of her eyes and hands that trembled slightly as they folded together. Everything was as it had been, yet something within her had changed. A quiet warmth, like a song that had ended, but still lingered in the air. On the table sat a small wooden box, old, dust-covered, yet the carved words remained clear. For the next sunrise, Helen opened it. Inside was a sheet of paper, yellowed with time, the letter she had once written to herself. She read it slowly, each word trembling on her lips. When she finished, she smiled softly. No more tears, only a gentle calm, like the hush of an evening breeze. The room was the same as before, only the light had changed, softer now, as if the whole space around her was smiling too. She turned toward the window. Outside, the sea was still blue, but no longer the restless blue of old days, rather the calm blue of return. The waves still rolled, but gently now. The wind still blew, but it no longer carried the chill of loneliness. Her hand moved to her chest, where the weight still lingered, and there a postcard rested. On the back, only a few faded lines remained. Thank you for coming back. Now live the rest of your days as if we're still watching the sea together. No signature, but she knew who had written it. Helen didn't cry. She simply smiled. A soft smile, tender as the morning sun. Slowly, she stood. Her hand reached for the old wool sweater, still carrying the scent of salt and lavender. She slipped it on, opened the door, and stepped out onto the porch. The sea before her shimmered in the newborn light. Seagulls skimmed the surface, their calls fading into the distance. Helen took a deep breath. The salty air, the cool morning mist brushing her skin. Everything felt real, clear, alive. She sat down on the familiar wooden chair, the one where she used to watch the sunsets. But today, for the first time, she watched the sunrise. Her voice rose softly, as if speaking to someone beside her, or to the girl she once was at 18. Thank you for coming back, Helen. Thank you for daring to live again, to love again, and at last, for learning how to let go. The wind carried her words away and took them out to sea. The sun climbed higher. Its light danced upon the water, glimmering like countless shards of glass. Each wave rippled, then faded, like memories quietly blending into one another. Helen closed her eyes. No fear, no regret. She smiled, and in that fleeting moment, the girl of 18 returned once more, not by magic, but through the peace she had finally found. Now, you don't have to think anymore. No need to remember, no need to worry. Let the night gently hold you, the way the sea holds the shore after every wave. Helen has found her peace, and you too are on your way there. Let sleep carry you slowly, deeply, to the place where only the wind remains, the scent of salt, and the softest dreams. Sleep well, may your night be gentle, and when you wake, may the sunrise smile upon you.